Welcome back, everyone, to the Racing Writers Podcast. I'm your host, Kelly Crandall, and look at that, I'm back sooner than I told you I was going to be, 2 weeks ago, a week ago, whatever it was. But here I am, I'm back. And I'm back because I could not pass up this opportunity to have Scott Pruett on the podcast. Scott, of course, is making his final motorsports start this weekend at Daytona in the Rolex 24 after 50 years of racing. You heard that correctly. 50 years of racing, 5 decades. Scott is going to hang up the helmet for good after this weekend, after one more race at Daytona. A fitting, phenomenal place for him to call it a career. So who was I to pass up the opportunity to talk to Scott Pruett? So that's what I did yesterday at the NASCAR Media Tour in Charlotte. Scott was on hand to talk about his weekend coming up, and of course, when the fine folks at Toyota asked if I wanted to get some time with Scott, I said, why not? Let's bring a microphone, let's make it a podcast, and let's get him on the record about anything and everything. So we've got about 30 minutes or so with Scott, and boy, did we get into some really interesting stuff. He was like an open book. And I believe I said it to him. I felt like I was getting a motorsports education, and it was phenomenal. So that's what we have this week. Again, I wasn't going to turn it down. It's probably one of the most fun interviews I've ever done. I could have kept going and going and going. And what made it really fun was we sat outside of the media print room at the Charlotte Convention Center. So we were out in the open. Drivers were walking back and forth. Media was walking back and forth. PR people, track people, everybody under the sun. It was a very open environment, so you're going to hear that natural noise in the background. But hey, I'm all for natural noise on podcasts instead of it being, too deathly silent sometimes. But what made this really cool and why I'm pointing it out is there's a point in the interview around the 27-minute mark where Jimmie Johnson comes by. 7-time NASCAR champion Jimmie Johnson comes by, and Scott Pruett jumps up and Jimmie comes over and shakes his hand, and you're going to hear this. The microphones were rolling as they talked to each other very briefly, just catching up, seeing how they were doing, whose plans were what, and it was actually at a point where Scott was talking about Jimmie Johnson and Jeff Gordon, so it was very kind of ironic. So they catch up, and before we continue the interview, you're going to hear Scott say, you know what, let me get a picture, or let me get a shot with Jimmie. So he jumps back up off the couch to go take that picture with Jimmie Johnson. And for those of you who are on social media, I'm sure you saw it. It was a great shot. And he comes back and we finish the interview. So that happens in real time, and you're going to hear it. So I left that in there. I thought it was great. Yesterday at the media tour was a lot of fun because there was, Scott Pruett and Fernando Alonso and Joey Hand were on no pun intended, were on hand, even though it was the NASCAR media tour, to talk about the Rolex 24 coming up. And there were NASCAR drivers who wanted to meet these guys, and they wanted to talk to the NASCAR drivers, and some of them were already friends, so they were catching up and saying hi, asking how the winter had gone, and talking racing, and it was just a really cool environment to be a part. So you will hear that on the podcast with Scott. It is a very fun conversation, and I think you all are going to enjoy it. So before we get started, once again, ratings, reviews have been wonderful. I have to admit something, that I was looking at the reviews and the ratings the other day on iTunes, and I'm so clumsy with my phone and I have fat fingers that I accidentally gave myself 1 star. So it's brought my rating down, and I'm kind of bummed about that. I can't believe I gave myself 1 star for this podcast. It's been crazy. It's been a busy week with the media tour. I hope you all have been over on racer.com catching up on what the drivers have been saying as we go into 2018. We've got Kyle Busch over there talking about NASCAR's marketing campaign. I have a story up about Steve Phelps responding to Kyle Busch's comments. Ty Dillon's up there. Clint Boyer's highlighted up there. everything, Kurt Busch and his contract is up there. I've got a Joey Logano piece coming, which you might see up there by the time you are hearing this podcast. Plenty more to come as we get ready to Daytona. I'm not stopping anytime soon, folks. The media tour provided a lot of content. I've also got other content that I've been gathering that will be going up on the website. Some really fun stories as we get ready for Speed Weeks. And tomorrow I'm not even off. Tomorrow I'm flying to Phoenix. It's Thursday, flying to Phoenix for more media opportunities. Come back Friday, gonna watch the Rolex 24 this weekend. For my wrestling friends, gonna watch the Royal Rumble this weekend. And then next week, got some more interview opportunities. Gonna record another podcast next week. Stay tuned for that. It's going to be, if all things go according to plan, with Matt Tifft, who has moved over to Richard Childress Racing this year. And I will say that podcast is going to be not so much a racing podcast, but more of a get-to-know Matt Tifft podcast. Yes, we know his tremendous story of coming back from a brain tumor, but who is Matt Tifft? What's his background? What's he all about? What does he enjoy doing? I want to dig into some of the more fun things with these guys. So that's what hopefully next week's podcast episode will be. And again, plenty of stories on racer.com. So take a deep breath. Let's get some wine. I've got wine with me right now. It's been a long day. It's been a long 3 days from this media tour, but you got to get what you can get. I'm done rambling. Let's get to the show, because gosh, this was so fun. It's hardly edited. It's very raw and real because Scott was really digging into his thoughts. It's going to be an emotional weekend for him, and I could tell that. I knew that before even asking him about it. Listen to some of this. He's got a Rolex Grand Am championship, more than one, 2004, 2006, 2008, 2010, 2012. He's got an SCCA Trans Am championship in 1987, 1994, and 2003. He's a Professional Karting Association World Champion, 1981. He's got IROC wins, IndyCar wins. He tried his hand at NASCAR. He's got 60 sports car wins, 5 Rolex 24 wins, 11 championships. This guy is a legend. He's a Hall of Famer in whatever Hall of Fame he wants to be in. I'm serious. Scott Pruett is an absolute legend, and I'm so glad I got to talk to him, even if it was only for 30 minutes. It could have been 3 days. It could have been 30 hours. So, again, let's get to the show because this is awesome. Here is Scott Pruett on the Racing Writers Podcast.
I said, okay, so do me proud then.
This is off to a great start, Scott. How do you feel, though? I mean, this weekend, this is it.
Good.
You're a few days out. I mean, you're doing all this, but it's lingering. How do you feel?
Good. Really good. I would say that more than anything else, I'm blessed to have 50 years in a sport that I absolutely love. I am excited to go out on my terms. I'm excited to do it at a track that I dearly love and I've had so much success at, the Rolex 24. Nothing like going to Daytona, right? I mean, it's
nothing
just
like it.
Special place. And my friends and family are going to be there with me. And I think my biggest challenge right now is, and I have in my head, is making sure I savor and enjoy every moment. I was going to
ask about that. So let's jump to that. How do you balance savoring it, but you are also going to go there with the expectation of you want to win?
I want to win.
So yeah. How do you split that? You thought about it, obviously.
Well, those people who know me know I'm a pretty intense guy.
Yep.
And it's hard to, I mean, with our Lexus program last year, we just got it kicked off. This was our first race last year. And so as I look at the Rolex 24 this year, we know so much. We have a year under our belt. We understand the car so much more, and how we approach the race is significantly different than what we did a year ago. So it's exciting being and knowing that we're in a lot better spot. And it's going to be a really fine balance because I can't help myself. You know, I'm that guy that that the team's give an extra key to, because I show up before the team guys do, right? I'm the guy opening the truck, and I love being at the racetrack. I love being around the cars. I love being around the guys, and that intensity that comes with going racing. And I'm really just trying to focus on that element of it, but also I don't want this moment to pass without really truly dearly enjoying it. I think I've been a little certainly humbled and overwhelmed at the outreach from fans. I've just kept my head down my whole life, and just focused on the next race, the next year, the next win, the next championship. And in some early discussions I had with some people, that especially my family, was, you know what, I'm just gonna call it my last race and be done with it. And they're like, whoa, no,
sounds
what?
like you say that so casually. Like, okay, we're done.
And I think, a milestone making it to 50 years. I started racing go-karts when I was young, and just with everything, it just seemed. And my family's my number one passion, as people know. Racing would be number two. Now wine is number three, and so when especially on social media, when I'm reading all these wonderful comments from these great fans I've had over the years. I remember you back in 1986. I saw you racing, at the Indy 500. I saw you in 1987. I saw you, I saw your victory at the Michigan 500. I saw you up in Martinsville. I saw, on and on and on and on and on and on. And it's really been humbling and wonderful.
You said a few minutes ago, and you said it in Daytona during the initial announcement, going out on your own terms. And we've heard I've heard, of course, a lot of NASCAR drivers say that over the last couple of years, but how important is that, Scott, for an athlete in general to be able to say on their own, this is how I want to do it?
I believe any athlete faces the same thing. One, the reality of when am I going to give up that sport I truly love? I think unless you're an athlete, you don't realize that, and I think a lot of people don't realize, that we live our life 1 year at a time. And what I mean by that, for the majority of my life, I've signed 1-year contracts. And so with signing 40 years, I've been racing 50 years, but my dad, my mom, they were taking me racing early on. But I'd say since I was probably 16, is when I started having, semi 1-year contracts. And most definitely when I signed my first really big deal in 1986 with Ford Motor Company. I've lived my life 1 year at a time. And so you're faced with the reality that at the end of every season, you have either put up those numbers and won those races and won those championships, made those home runs, completed those 50-yard passes to take the win. All athletes, they're as good as their last season. And if you're good, that means that you were able to get a contract for the next year, because this is a cutthroat sport, and I don't mean just racing in general, but I mean any professional athlete feels that if you're not putting up the numbers and if you're not getting a job done, you'll be one of the first people replaced pretty quickly. Because if the organization isn't in a position to go get sponsorship or win championships or win races or win titles, they need to change and replace those components that aren't getting a job done. And so being able to get to this point, and I'm sorry if I'm dragging this out a little bit, but tying it right back to what you're talking about, nobody wants to be that stinky pair of gym socks in a locker that people want to get rid of, right?
I've never heard it analyzed like that, but all right.
It's a good visual, right?
Yeah.
And
Will stick with me for the rest of the day.
yeah, and so I think for athletes, if you've been blessed with an incredible career and you've made it this far in, and you can make that decision on making that decision that is best for you as you know move on to the next chapter of your life. Yeah, it's a pretty special thing.
So is there a way to even try to sum up 50 years of racing?
It's interesting because it's been fun because I've gone back and I'm trying to post something, at least one thing a day, if not a couple things of races and cars and things and stuff I've done, right? And it's been pretty special for me when I look back now and I've gone through some of that stuff to see, gosh, all this great stuff I've done, right? Yeah. I posted a picture of Dan Gurney and myself, and he truly is one of my heroes, without a doubt. And Mario Andretti and Michael Andretti and Allinger Jr. and Allinger Sr. and Emerson Fittipaldi and Danny Sullivan, that past era of all these great race car drivers that I got a chance to compete against. And then you have more of the current era or Bill Elliott and Mark Martin and Dale Earnhardt Sr. Dale Earnhardt Jr. and Kenseth we were all three rookies the same year in NASCAR.
Oh, don't you worry, I'm going to get to that.
And I think, even those things that people haven't seen, for instance, like, I went and raced the World Championships in go-karts in Italy and raced against Ayrton Senna. And when I look back at those names and all those different disciplines and all those great race car drivers that I got a chance to compete with, it's a pretty special thing.
As I said, I want to get to NASCAR, but I understand sports cars are the first love.
Yes.
How did that come about?
I think that was...
I guess how did the love affair come about?
It was... So I did go-karts and won everything. So I started go-karts when I was 8. Won my first national title a few years later when I was 11. And then virtually won a national title or a professional race every year after that. Started racing go-karts throughout the world, because that was the only thing that was I come from a traditional middle-class family, struggling to make ends meet month to month, no real extra money, and so a lot of my ability to continue racing came to the success of, okay, well, if I could keep winning in go-karts, then different companies, they wouldn't pay me, but they would give me their product to drive. I was hired to go race their stuff, even though I wasn't paid to go do it. But you get expenses and some other stuff. Yeah. And so, I think because of racing go-karts and being on road courses, growing up in California, that's where the joy of racing, even though I raced throughout the world, but most of it was California, then North America, and then globally, because I went to, I raced in Australia, and I raced in Hong Kong, and I raced in New Zealand, and I raced in all go-kart stuff, Italy, and a little bit in Europe. So I think the next.
It was just natural then.
It was more natural, yeah. I'm making that next step, and I'm talking to everybody I knew at anybody. I'm writing letters. I'm talking to people, and I had my first real big test drive in '83 with Ford Motor Company, and I went to Elkhart Lake and drove what was then their front-engine Mustang GTP car, very cool car. And that was sort of my first opportunity to get behind the wheel of of a big serious race car. And I just kept at it, kept knocking on doors, kept talking to people, kept knocking on doors. I did a race for Toyota. Nobody remember this SCCA sort of club race at Riverside.
Well, you've been all over the place, Scott. Damn,
right.
You're doing so great. I can't remember everything.
And we the guy I was driving with, we won by a lap. So that was pretty. So all these things just kind of kept multiplying, and met Bruce Jenner, and he was a big supporter and advocate, and in late '85, had the opportunity to drive with him for Ford with Roush. We ran very strong. Actually, I think we led some of that race, and then I think something on the car broke. They got it fixed, and I think we finished second or third. Mm-hmm. The next race I did was with Darren Brassfield at Pocono in IMSA, and we won. So all of a sudden, people were going, "Hey, who's this Scott Pruett guy?" And then from there, signed on with Ford Motor Company for 1986. We won 2 championships that year. Followed up in '87 with a Trans Am championship. Followed in '88.
It was just a natural evolution then.
Yeah.
That was like you said, became the true love.
Right.
I know it's probably hard to do, but as you've been going back and looking at some photos and posting some things that I've seen you do on social media, have you thought about what some of your favorite battles or who some of your favorite battles with in any discipline that you've had?
There's so many that, I mean, even to pick out 5, to pick out 10, it's difficult. I guess, my very first win at the Rolex 24, my very first overall win at the Rolex 20, my very first IndyCar victory, and how it came by. The Michigan 500, wheel to wheel, with Al Unser Jr. beat him by inches. One of the highest rated IndyCar races ever. My second place finish at Watkins Glen with Ganassi in NASCAR. My victory, just shortly after I was married in Australia in IndyCars. So there's, the IROC race at Daytona right after, because in March of '90, I crashed heavily and had shattered my ankles, broke my knees, broke my back.
Injuries, yeah.
I was out for the season. So one of my first races back was an IROC race at Daytona. Passed Bill Elliott the last lap to go on and take the victory. So having, being out for a whole season, virtually a whole season, with these injuries, and then coming back, and my whole passion was just getting back in the car and going racing. And then to come back and win my first race was pretty special.
And to beat one of NASCAR's best.
Yeah.
Who has made you better over the years, Scott? Who's pushed you? Who has been somebody maybe that you've watched or you've competed against and that forced you or that pushed you to continually get better, to continually hone your skills and your craft? Is there somebody you can point at and be like, because of that person?
Me?
Yeah.
I'm my own worst critic. That'd be number one. And then there's great guys I've learned from. Dale Earnhardt Sr. What he did and how he did it, I learned so much. Mario Andretti. He taught me more racing wheel to wheel with him than I can tell you. Dan Gurney taught me so much about being a driver on the track, but also being a good person off the track. It hit me really hard early on. I'm just that kid walking around the racetrack wanting to get an autograph. And he was one of the guys, Dan Gurney was one of those guys that took the time to talk to me and sign my autograph. And that was a wonderful moment for me to reflect on how I wanted to emulate my life moving forward in racing.
So, looking at the NASCAR aspect, when you came in 2000 with Cal Wells, you were driving the Tide car. Did you realize at the time how iconic that car was, the Tide colors?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. I mean, let me tell you, here I was, IndyCar career was going great. I'm just, here I'm balancing a 3-year extension on my IndyCar contract, or moving to NASCAR, because I always was intrigued by NASCAR, doing all the IROC stuff, but also
I was going to ask that, why even stock cars in the first place?
Love the challenge of doing it. And I had meeting after meeting after meeting, all the people at Procter & Gamble, all the people at Tide, being really clear, just going, okay guys, let me just be clear with you. brand new team, brand new driver. This is the worst perfect storm that you can imagine. And I said, it's going to be I said, the first year is going to be tough. Second year, we'll be getting it figured out. We might have a chance to win a race. And by year 3, we'll be figuring this out. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Everybody was like, yeah, that's great. And then everybody got amnesia by about June, July, when things weren't going as well as they would have liked. And,
it's not the first time. It won't be the last in this sport.
No. I did get paid for my 3 years, although certainly not the way that I wanted to be. And that was one of my biggest sort of transitions, because I'm going to use a bad word. I said, "Fuck it, I'm done with this sport." And then I moved from there to TV. So I worked for ABC, ESPN. And I thought on the side, you know what? Corvette contacted me. Hey, we'd love to, could you come be our third driver for all the long races? So Daytona, Sebring, Le Mans, Petit Le Mans. I said, sure. And also Chip called and said, hey, I got a NASCAR. Would you be interested in coming and doing a Glen? I said, gosh, that sounds great. So 2 races that year. 4 races that year.
Well, I was going to say, because you went from I think you did 28 of the 30-something races the first year, and then it was only 1 or 2 or 3 the years after that. So that's why? That's
right. So moved out of, so I went from full-time in 2000. Yep. Again, working most heavily on TV stuff. Went to Le Mans with Corvette, and we won. So the first time that Corvette had won, first time that I had won.
Again, you were still all over the place.
Still all over the place. The next year I worked for Speed, predominantly I worked for Speed doing all the IndyCar races on broadcasting. And then did a couple races for Chip again. Had some really good finishes. And then about mid-season, I really started missing being out of a race car. Mm-hmm. I just I had to get back full time. And so I signed on with Jaguar for Trans Am. We went on to win a championship in 2003. And then Chip came to me because I was doing some of the NASCAR stuff with him. And in 2003, I think that was the year we finished second at the Glen. And I think in 2004 we finished third.
I think so, yeah.
I think
I'm looking at the numbers last night.
I think that's right. And then so in 2003, won a championship with Jaguar, and then moved from there with Chip and Lexus. So Lexus was the power plant. We ran prototypes, and then started this incredible run of wins and championships and just great racing and with Chip.
Yeah. On the move to NASCAR, you said in 2000 that, of course, it was a steep learning curve, but you also said something I found interesting, that you were mentally working harder than you ever had before in a race car. What did you mean by that? What were some of the things you had to do? What was so different going from what you had been doing into a stock car?
It was 100% like I'd never experienced before. I mean, you think you know what you're getting into. I mean, you look at guys like Montoya, and you look at guys like Franchitti, and some of the guys that I was kind of the first guy that made that transition. And then realizing, wow, this is, just as I know how to drive an Indy car and what all that means, the majority of that you got to throw out the window, because that does not apply. And it's a whole different view of what it takes to drive a stock car. And I was I was not, blinded going in. I had eyes wide open. I understood. I mean, I moved my wife 8 months pregnant to Charlotte, North Carolina, so I could be right by the team, and I was at the team every freaking day. I mean, I knew what commitment I had to make, and I was 110% on board.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we've seen guys from open wheel. I think you mentioned some of them earlier. Great IndyCar drivers who've come to NASCAR, and they don't find that success. I mean, some people like Tony and Juan were able to do it, but it really is an adjustment. But
so it was different. A lot of years. I mean, think about how many years it was for Juan.
Until they caught on.
A lot of years. Not the year 2, not year 3. I mean, it was, and he was
Kevin
stepping
Harvick
in.
was, not to cut you off, I think Kevin Harvick was making that analogy earlier about Danica Patrick. You know, she came over and one of the first things he said to her was, look, I've already got 20 years on you in a stock car.
Right.
So it's complete. It's not a joke. It's not just it's not an excuse, I should say.
Yeah.
It is an adjustment. It's not easy.
100%. And I had never, and I think when you look at how many races you do and how many races you do in a row.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think there was a stretch of 20 races in a row, and you're going.
Yeah, that's something else many people mention is the schedule. It's not.
Yeah, and you have to.
It's grinding. That's the word everybody uses.
It's grinding. It's grinding on everybody. Yeah, and I loved every minute. I mean, I loved every minute and was frustrated every minute of it. I love being at the racetrack. I love going racing. And you know, personal achievements for me were, you know, first race at Richmond, I went home. The second race, you know, finished top 10.
Yeah.
First race at Darlington, went home. Second race came back, you know, qualified, I think top 10 and ran top 15. Went to the Brickyard, had one of my most memorable races, raced almost the whole race long with Dale Earnhardt Sr. 10th, 11th, 11th, 10th, 10th, 11th. I finished 10th, he finished 11th. And as Dale did, kind of runs into Sadie after the race, gives you a thumbs up. Said, after the race, he came over and said, Pruett, I think you're starting to get this shit figured out. Mm-hmm. So it was coming.
Yeah.
I mean, it was coming.
It takes time, though.
It takes time.
So in 2000, your rookie year, let's see, we had Dale Earnhardt was still around, Dale Jr., Matt Kenseth, Phil Elliott, Tony Stewart. I mean, the list goes on. What were some of the relationships like you had in the garage with these guys when you came over? Whether it was them or anybody else, what do you remember about?
It was everybody was great at trying to help me out. They understood. They understood how difficult. They had probably understood more about the transition than I did, but.
Yeah.
But they were great at trying to help out. You know, most all the guys were, and that's something that was pretty special. And getting, you know, some of the friendships and some of the guys, the bodies and you know Earnhardt and Jeff Gordon and you know Jimmy Johnson. I mean, really great guys that were, you know, happy to try and help me out.
Did Earnhardt ever come up and wrap you around the neck and you feel like you were going to die?
No.
So you never got the infamous Earnhardt squeeze of the back of the neck?
No.
But no. you got the Bender thing.
I got the Fender thing, and then after the race came up and you know we talked and you said, Pruett, I think you're starting to get this figured out. So
you've been tied into the Ganassi program. What do you think of, I mean, I know you have a relationship with Jamie and Kyle. What have you seen from that program and those two in particular the last couple of years?
Well, I think, you know, Jamie's been the staple there for a lot of years. Kyle, you know, you got to realize he grew up just, you know, 30 minutes from me and knew of him growing up and also very much knew of him before anybody else knew of him when Ganassi was helping him. And so, you know, with Chip and with Mike Hull and seeing how they were mentoring him getting up, you know, working with him through sprint cars and some of the other things and seeing how all that transitioned. It was no surprise to me to see that because a lot of us could see that talent. And then when you saw him get behind the wheel in NASCAR and all of a sudden the spotlight's on him and a lot of people went, who's this guy? You know, all of a sudden, right? And now, you know, very much establish him as you know, one of the guys to beat out there on any given weekend. So it was exciting to see that, but also it's interesting to see some of the other drivers that cycled through. These guys that you're just shaking your head going, they're too worried about their die cast, or they're too worried about, you know, what color the car is, than focus on their driving.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, how much do you pay attention to what goes on over in our world? Like, do you enjoy the races? Are there drivers in particular?
I watch every race.
Yeah?
I watch every race. Every race I can, yeah. I had, you know, I have my favorites for sure. I mean, my friends. I mean, Jeff Gordon, dear friend.
Yep.
Jimmy Johnson, good friend. Kyle, Kurt. And then, you know, last year, We're just talking about you.
Literally just said your name.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
Doing well?
How's
He's
things?
talking smack about you, by the way.
Always has.
Yeah.
You doing good?
Good, you?
Good.
Ready to wind it down?
Ready to wind it down.
Yeah.
I'm following your teammates'
Right?
way.
Right.
Yeah. Better do it on your terms than we were just talking than being
Yep.
that stinky pair of socks left in the locker room, right?
You would never be that, but I hear you.
Yeah. So you looking good?
You too, man.
Yeah.
What, you going down?
Yeah. So we I had some work at TRD,
Gotcha.
tied this in, and then heading down there this afternoon. So
Well, good luck, brother.
thanks, brother. Great seeing you.
See you soon. Yeah,
Best
you
of luck.
too.
Thank you.
When we come out west, can look us up.
All right, I'll do that.
You're near snow, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Good luck.
All right, man. Take care.
Speaking of Sonoma, it makes me think of wine. How in the world did you get into the wine business? You have a vineyard. It's an random topic, but it made me curious.
That's a really good. Actually, let me grab a shot with. Hey, Jimmy.
50 years of racing. How do you suddenly get into the wine business? And you have a vineyard. Are you out there? Like, how involved are you?
I ripped, I cleared, I planted. We did all the. I didn't want to do a vineyard. Just say I'm doing my vineyard in the backyard. Now, let me take a step back. So I grew up on a ranch, and we had where I grew up. We had oats and wheat, and then we also contracted to. Or my grandfather had contracted to do a lot of rice as well. So once a farmer, always a farmer. Can't help, but be involved in and around that stuff. I loved it. I love the work. I love, in everything in and around working with the dirt and with soil. And so I didn't want to do row crops, that's for sure. And then I also didn't want.
Wine seems more fun anyway.
It sounds a lot more fun.
Yeah.
And then I also didn't want to plant plants in my backyard, just say, hey, look, I got plants in my backyard. So we did a year climate study, a year soil study of the best guys we could find from Napa. And he came over and said, it's a great location. He said, this is a spectacular place. And then I did all the clearing, all the prep, planted the plants. And I didn't want to just have my name on the label. I wanted to do the work. And so I never had any instruction, never knew, much about it, except I like drinking it. Tied in with some, incredible winemaker from over in Napa who was my mentor. And our very first release, both by Wine Spectator, both of our wines got 91 points. In 2010, our next release, all three wines got 93 points. In 2012, we had the first time we tied with another winery to have the highest rated Syrah in the world. In 2014, we did the same thing again. And
so just like racing, you've been successful in this too.
It's been unexpected, but truly wonderful. And I do it all myself. I mean, that's the. We touch every bottle. I'm right in the middle. I do all racking. I do, all the bottling, all the everything. I'm right in the middle of it.
So the fact that you like to get your hands dirty, so to speak, and you are so involved, has that maybe helped get you away from racing when you've needed it? Maybe help clear your mind when you needed to? Like, is that a thing? I mean, is that, or is...
Yes. Yes and no. Yes, as in there's something so magical about going out and walking through your vineyard at 5 a.m. when the sun's just trying to come up and it's really quiet, and we're fortunate where we live at the end of a private road and we have 50 acres and we own a ridge line and it's very private and very wonderful, and there's something that's, for me personally, about being on that property. It's always brought me to that point. And now with the wine side of it, it's forced me to find more patience.
Okay.
Being involved in racing, I don't know if there's a lot of people who are patient in racing, but everything happens in fractions of a second, and you're getting down to the last lap of a race. you can make things happen. I mean, you can, take example, the Michigan 500, right? Little Al passes me, white flag comes out, he passes me going in turn one. I'm going through my head, okay, I'm going to draft him, and I'm going straight to the fence, going in turn three, and it's going to be checkers or wreckers, right? And so we came away with a victory by inches, but you could make that happen. In the wine industry or in the wine business, it tells you. It tells you when it's ready to pick. It tells you when fermentation's done. It tells you when to bottle. It tells you, and it's years, not months, not weeks, not months, but years. And my winemaker consultant, he was really clear and said, if I can just give you any advice, whatever you're thinking about doing, give it a week, give it a month. He said, you just want to do something so aggressive and so fast. Don't do it. And that was such a difficult concept for me. If somebody said to you, you know what, whatever you're thinking, just kind of think about that for a week or a month or 2 months. Mm-hmm. Where in a wine's life, that's a very small moment of time. But that concept, to wrap my head around that, was really, and still is, pretty difficult.
So I could end and ask, what's life after racing, but I feel like I've asked that so many times with NASCAR drivers over the last couple of years, I'm going to go in a different direction. After 5 decades of racing, Scott, what in the world is in your office or man cave? What is some of the stuff that you have? I think I've been very fortunate where now looking back 5 decades, especially as I'm at this point, my very first national title in go-karts, the leather jacket you won. Some of the trophies. I have my IndyCar from '95. I have my '94 Trans Am Championship car. I have just a few other cool rods. I have helmets and suits and stuff that, all these, anything significant that I did, especially from about, the 90s on, I've kept helmets and suits. So my first IndyCar win, my first IndyCar pole, give kids the world when I did the special NASCAR painting. Championships and Rolex 24-hour wins. I've kept those helmets, and obviously all the trophies and checkered flags that they give you at the end of the race. And I'm not sure what I'm gonna do with all of it. So that I have it in my office, man cave, being able to now when I look at some of those things I haven't seen in a long time, going, that was a pretty cool race. Yeah. That was a pretty cool season. That was a pretty cool championship. And looking back at those things, and then looking forward, I think the biggest question has been between my wife and I is that how are you going to get your adrenaline fix? Because that's been such a big component of my life the whole time. And so it's been nice to be able to extend my relationship with Lexus. They make a lot of performance cars, being able to drive those fast. With the LFA, I was given rides numerous years ago. I was given rides to media and executives and so on at Las Vegas Motor Speedway, and we rolled in. Everybody who went for a ride with me joined the over 185 mile an hour club as I rolled down in turn one. So these are serious rides I was getting. And so having the opportunity to still do that kind of stuff is going to give me most certainly give my adrenaline fix. I could keep going. I feel like I'm getting a motorsports education, but I've enjoyed this. I hope you have too.
Absolutely.
Congratulations on a wonderful career, and hopefully you end it on quite a high note this weekend.
I hope so.
Thank you, Scott.
My pleasure.